Stop everything. Stop exactly what you are doing right now. Secure your surroundings, silence every distraction, and prepare yourself for the most critical financial intelligence briefing you will ever receive. This is Capital Archives, and what we are broadcasting today is the absolute nightmare scenario that the Western financial establishment has spent decades and billions of dollars trying to prevent. We are witnessing, in real time, the catastrophic breakdown of the global paper-silver market, and the desperation of the ruling financial elite is on full display. The rumors that have been echoing through the dark corridors of the commodities markets have finally materialized into a terrifying, undeniable reality. The Comex, the beating heart of the Western paper-silver illusion and the primary mechanism for global price discovery, is in a state of absolute, unmitigated panic. Over the past few days, the exchange has executed a maneuver so draconian, so utterly desperate, that it screams of an impending systemic default. They have instituted 7 consecutive margin hikes on silver futures contracts. 7. Let that sink in. This is not a standard regulatory adjustment to cool down a slightly overheated market. This is a deliberate, coordinated, and violent weaponization of the exchange rules designed to artificially crush the price of silver and force the liquidation of long positions. The cartel of bullion banks is trapped, the vaults are bleeding dry, and they are pulling every emergency lever they have left to stop a total, catastrophic silver default. If you hold paper silver, if you rely on silver for industrial manufacturing, or if you simply hold your wealth in a fiat currency backed by nothing but faith and credit, you are currently standing on the tracks of a runaway freight train. The disconnect between the synthetic paper market and the hard physical reality has finally snapped, and the shockwave is about to vaporize trillions of dollars of illusory paper wealth. To understand the sheer magnitude and gravity of 7 consecutive margin hikes, you must first completely deconstruct the lies you've been told about how the silver market actually operates, and you must understand the weaponized mechanics of the exchange itself. In the Comex casino, market participants do not need to put up the full notional value of the silver they are trading. They use leverage. They post an initial margin, a small fraction of the contract's total value, to control massive amounts of paper silver. This allows speculators to amplify their gains, but it also exposes them to catastrophic losses. The exchange dictates the size of this margin. When the price of silver begins to rise rapidly, threatening the massive, concentrated short positions held by the major bullion banks, the exchange steps in to protect its most lucrative members. They raise the margin requirements. Suddenly, a trader who was comfortably holding a long position is hit with a margin call. They must immediately deposit more fiat currency into their account to maintain their position. If they do not have the cash, or if they refuse to allocate more capital to the trade, their broker forcefully liquidates their position. They are forced to sell their paper silver into the market. This forced selling triggers stop-loss orders from other traders, creating a cascading waterfall of selling pressure that artificially crashes the price of the asset, regardless of the underlying physical supply and demand fundamentals. This is how the paper market has controlled the physical reality for decades. It is a rigged game where the house can change the rules the moment the players start winning. But what is happening right now is unprecedented. The exchange raised the margins once, expecting the usual engineered price collapse. It did not happen. They raised it a second time, a third time, a fourth time. The price refused to break. They have now hiked margins 7 times in a row, a sequence of desperation that we have not seen since the historic silver squeezes of the past. Why is the weapon failing? Because the nature of the buyer has fundamentally changed. In the past, the longs were heavily leveraged hedge funds and retail speculators who would easily fold under the pressure of margin calls. Today, the longs are entirely different entities. They are sovereign wealth funds, massive Eastern central banks, and gigantic industrial conglomerates that have virtually unlimited fiat capital. When the Comex raises the margin, these entities do not panic and sell. They simply wire the additional cash, meet the margin call, and hold their ground. They are calling the bluff. They know that the bullion banks are naked short, meaning they have sold millions of ounces of paper silver that they do not actually possess. The buyers are holding their contracts because they do not want fiat trading profits. They want the physical atoms of silver. They are standing for physical delivery, and this is the ultimate existential threat to the Comex. We must look back at the historical precedent to understand the sheer panic gripping the exchange. The last time the financial establishment faced a silver crisis of this magnitude was in 1980, during the legendary run of the Hunt brothers. Nelson Bunker Hunt and William Herbert Hunt recognized that inflation was destroying the purchasing power of the dollar, and they began aggressively accumulating physical silver and long futures contracts. As they cornered the market and demanded physical delivery, the vaults of the Comex and the LBMA were pushed to the brink of emptiness. The price skyrocketed from a few dollars to $50 an ounce. The bullion banks, heavily short, were facing total annihilation. What did the exchange do? They did exactly what they are doing now, but they took it to its ultimate, tyrannical conclusion. They instituted Silver Rule 7, which stated that traders could only place orders for liquidation. You were literally banned from buying silver. You were only legally allowed to sell it. They changed the fundamental rules of the free market to save the banking cartel, destroying the Hunt brothers and crashing the price of silver. This history is crucial because it proves that the exchange is not a neutral arbiter of price discovery. It is a defensive fortress built to protect the institutional short sellers. The 7 margin hikes we are witnessing today are the modern equivalent of the panic that led to Rule 7. The exchange is trying to engineer a massive washout before they are forced to admit that the vaults are empty. However, the strategy that worked in 1980 is doomed to fail in 2026, and the reason lies in the fundamental transformation of silver's role in the global economy. The Hunt brothers were two wealthy individuals speculating on a monetary asset. Today, the demand for silver is an inelastic, ravenous industrial black hole that is entirely immune to the paper games played in New York and London. We are no longer living in an era where silver is primarily used for silverware and photographic film. We are in the midst of the most aggressive, resource-intensive technological revolution in human history, and silver is the irreplaceable bottleneck. Let's look at the photovoltaic sector. The global push for green energy has mandated the deployment of millions of solar panels, and the industry has transitioned to TAPCon and heterojunction cell technologies. These advanced architectures are significantly more efficient at capturing solar energy, but they require massive, fundamentally irreplaceable amounts of silver paste. The solar industry alone is on track to consume nearly 250 million ounces of silver this year, wiping out roughly 30% of total global mine production. When a massive Chinese solar manufacturer needs physical silver to keep their assembly lines running, they do not care if the Comex hikes margins 7 times or 70 times. Margin hikes do not produce silver atoms. The manufacturer will pay whatever fiat premium is required to secure the physical metal, because without it, their multi-billion-dollar operation comes to a grinding halt. Simultaneously, the artificial intelligence arms race has triggered a massive expansion of hyperscale data centers across the globe. These facilities house incredibly powerful processors that generate massive amounts of heat. Silver, being the most thermally and electrically conductive element in the universe, is absolutely critical for the specialized solders, switches, and cooling matrices required to keep these AI systems from literally melting down. Add to this the explosive growth of battery electric vehicles, which require 3 times the amount of silver as internal combustion engine vehicles, and the relentless demand from the global military-industrial complex for precision-guided munitions and satellite communications. This demand cannot be destroyed by higher paper prices or margin hikes. If the price of silver triples, a solar manufacturer will not stop buying it. They will simply pass the cost on to the consumer, because without silver, they have no product. The Comex is fighting a war of attrition against the physical laws of metallurgy and global industrial expansion, and it is a war they are mathematically guaranteed to lose. The 7 margin hikes are a desperate attempt to shake out the weak hands, but the strong hands, the industrial titans, are completely unfazed. The catastrophic failure of the Comex paper illusion is exacerbated by a geological reality that mainstream financial analysts completely ignore or utterly fail to understand. The common, deeply flawed assumption in classical economics is that the cure for high prices is high prices, meaning if the price of silver skyrockets due to a supply squeeze, mining companies will simply ramp up production, flood the market with new supply, and stabilize the system. This demonstrates a fatal ignorance of geological extraction. Silver is a geological ghost. Over 70% of all the silver mined on planet Earth is not extracted from primary silver mines. It is a byproduct of mining for industrial base metals like zinc, lead, and copper. You cannot simply command a copper mine to produce more silver. To get more silver, they would have to drastically increase their copper extraction, which would flood the copper market, crash the price of copper, and bankrupt their entire operation. Therefore, the global supply of newly mined silver is fiercely, immutably inelastic. It does not respond swiftly to price spikes. Furthermore, the global mining sector has suffered from over a decade of severe capital underinvestment, stringent environmental regulations, and the undeniable reality of declining ore grades. The easy high-grade silver near the surface of the Earth was mined out a century ago. Miners are digging deeper, moving exponentially more tons of dirt to extract fewer and fewer ounces of metal. We are staring down the precipice of peak silver, a structural multi-year deficit where the Earth physically cannot yield enough metal to satisfy the ravenous demands of the modern green and digital economy. No amount of paper contracts, derivative manipulation, or consecutive margin hikes by the Comex can alter the geological constraints of the Earth's crust. This internal collapse of the Western paper market is occurring exactly at the moment when the geopolitical tectonic plates are violently shifting, accelerating the drain of physical metal from west to east. We at Capital Archives have meticulously documented the strategy of the BRICS nations, led by China and Russia, to systematically dismantle the hegemony of the United States dollar. They have realized that true sovereign wealth is not held in digital entries on a Western central bank ledger, which can be frozen or confiscated at the push of a button by Washington. True wealth is physical mass. It is energy, and it is tangible commodities. While the West has been busy trading synthetic silver derivatives, suppressing the price, and hiking margins, the East has been quietly, relentlessly accumulating the physical reality. Look at the Shanghai Gold Exchange. The ZG operates on a physical delivery model, not a fractional reserve paper model. For months, the SG has been trading silver at a massive persistent premium compared to the Comex and the LBMA. This arbitrage gap acts as a giant global vacuum cleaner. Bullion banks and opportunistic traders acquire the artificially suppressed paper silver in the West, demand physical delivery, load the metal onto cargo planes, and sell it into the voracious Chinese market for an instant risk-free profit. India, a nation with a deep cultural and unshakable affinity for precious metals, recently imported tens of millions of ounces in a single month, further devastating the global above-ground stockpiles. The Comex is bleeding to death because the East is calling their bluff. They do not want margin calls or cash settlements, they want the atoms. The 7 margin hikes in New York are a direct, panicked response to the East executing a flawless, mathematically sound raid on the West's heavily manipulated, under-collateralized vaults. Let us look closely at the actual vault data, because numbers, unlike central bankers and exchange regulators, do not lie. The Comex operates two categories of inventory, eligible and registered. Eligible just means the metal is sitting in the vault and meets the purity and weight standards of the exchange, but it is privately owned and not available for delivery. Registered is the actual collateral. It is the metal that is theoretically available to satisfy a physical delivery request from a contract holder. For months, we have watched the registered category hemorrhage millions of ounces, draining down to levels that defy all historical norms. We have seen the registered silver drop below 100 million ounces, then below 50 million, plunging into numbers so low that a single mid-sized industrial conglomerate could theoretically stand for delivery and wipe out the entire exchange. When the ratio of open paper interest to available physical registered metal hits absurd levels, such as 100 paper ounces for every 1 physical ounce, the entire system becomes a highly combustible powder keg. The 7 margin hikes are the exchange's attempt to throw water on the fuse. By forcing the paper price down, they hope to discourage traders from standing for physical delivery, because taking delivery requires paying the full fiat value of the contract. But the strategy is failing because the premium in the physical market, the amount you have to pay over the spot price to actually get a real silver coin or bar in your hand, has detached entirely from the paper market. Wholesale buyers see through the paper crash. They see a fire sale orchestrated by the Comex, and they are using it as an opportunity to back up the truck and load up on even more physical metal at artificially suppressed prices. So, what is the endgame? What happens when the 7th margin hike fails, when the 8th fails, and the longs simply refuse to liquidate? We are approaching the singularity of the silver market, the moment of systemic default. When an exchange like the Comex runs out of physical metal to satisfy the legal demands of contract holders who are standing for delivery, they do not simply close their doors and declare bankruptcy. They invoke obscure, deeply buried clauses in their rulebooks designed specifically to protect themselves and their institutional members. They will invoke force majeure, or they will utilize emergency cash settlement protocols. This means that if you are an industrial buyer who purchased a futures contract because you absolutely need 5,000 ounces of physical silver to keep your factory running, the exchange looks you in the eye and tells you that they cannot give you the metal. Instead, they forcibly close out your contract and hand you a check for the current, manipulated paper spot price. They give you fiat dollars. But here is the terrifying reality that the Wall Street algorithms cannot comprehend. You cannot manufacture a high-efficiency solar panel out of $100 bills. You cannot build a guidance system for a hypersonic missile using a digital bank ledger. When the exchange defaults on physical delivery and hands cash to industrial powerhouses, those entities do not simply give up. They take that cash, they bypass the fraudulent paper exchanges entirely, and they enter the dark physical markets, the wholesale markets, and the international refiners, bidding the price of physical metal up to whatever astronomical level is required to secure the atoms they need to survive. The psychological contagion resulting from a Comex delivery failure will be instantaneous and utterly devastating to the broader financial ecosystem. For decades, retail investors have been herded into exchange-traded funds, the ubiquitous ETFs like SLV, under the false assumption that buying shares in these funds is equivalent to owning physical silver in a vault. But read the prospectuses of these mammoth funds carefully. They are riddled with loopholes, rehypothecation clauses, unallocated accounting tricks, and authorized participant exemptions. The custodians of these funds are often the very same bullion banks that are shorting the paper market. When the primary exchange mechanism breaks down, when the Comex declares force majeure, the entire paper chain of custody implodes. Investors will suddenly realize that their ETF shares are not claims on physical metal safely stored in a vault, but merely unsecured, unbacked digital IOUs in a system that has just admitted it has no metal. This realization will trigger an unprecedented frantic bank run on physical silver. The masses will stampede into local coin shops, online bullion dealers, and private vaults, desperate to exchange their rapidly depreciating fiat currency and their worthless paper silver derivatives for anything tangible. But by the time the retail public realizes the Comex has failed and the margin hikes were just a smokescreen, it will be far too late. The physical supply will have already been completely absorbed by the industrial giants, the sovereign wealth funds, and the Eastern central banks. The premiums on physical coins and bars will not just rise by a few percentage points. They will detach entirely from the spot price, trading at multiples of whatever fictional number the broken Comex is projecting. The paper market will be frozen in time, rendered utterly irrelevant, while the physical market ascends into the stratosphere, discovering its true, unmanipulated price for the first time in generations. This is the ultimate endgame of a financial system that believed it could endlessly print currency, endlessly issue unbacked derivatives, and endlessly manipulate the physical elements of the universe without consequence. The panic we are seeing, the 7 consecutive margin hikes, is not merely a technical glitch or a routine volatility adjustment. It is the death rattle of the fiat era. It is the violent thrashing of a leviathan that has finally been caught in its own net. It is the moment when the physical reality brutally reasserts its dominance over the financial hallucination. Silver, because of its unique, paradoxical dual role as both an indispensable industrial miracle metal and a historical monetary safe haven, is the Achilles heel of the entire global debt matrix. By artificially suppressing its price for decades, The financial elite subsidized the technological expansion of the modern world while simultaneously discouraging the capital investment required to actually mine the metal. They created a massive, tightly coiled spring of deferred physical demand, and now that spring is violently releasing. The fact that the exchange is resorting to such draconian measures is the ultimate vindication for those who have stood outside the mainstream narrative, demanding physical possession in a world obsessed with digital illusions. The wealth transfer that is about to occur will be of biblical proportions. It will not be a transfer from the poor to the rich, but a transfer from those holding paper promises to those holding tangible elemental reality. As we stand on the precipice of this historic dislocation, the mission of Capital Archives remains unwavering. We are here to strip away the propaganda, to expose the fragile mechanics of the financial machinery, and to prepare you for the violent paradigm shift that is now unfolding in real time. The panic at the Comex is the signal fire. It signifies that the era of artificial abundance and manipulated pricing is over. The institutions that have controlled the narrative for a century are losing their grip, forced to resort to heavy-handed margin hikes because they have run out of the real money and the real metal. Do not be deceived by the inevitable mainstream media spin that will attempt to portray this as a minor regulatory adjustment to protect market stability. This is a structural crisis. It is the culmination of decades of financial hubris meeting the unyielding laws of physics and geology. If your wealth is tied up in the paper derivative complex, if you are trusting ETFs or unallocated accounts, you are currently the yield for the entities executing this physical drain. You are the collateral damage in a war between paper and atoms. You must reevaluate your exposure immediately. You must understand that in a world where the primary exchanges can arbitrarily rewrite the rules, hike margins to infinity, and ultimately refuse physical delivery, counterparty risk is the ultimate lethal threat. The physical silver market is breaking free from its paper chain. The Eastern accumulation strategy has broken the Western fractional reserve vault. The Comex is panicking because the silver is gone. Prepare yourselves accordingly. Take possession of your assets. Step outside the digital matrix. Because when the world finally wakes up to the fact that the vault is empty, the true price discovery of the most undervalued asset on the planet will begin, and it will be brutal, rapid, and entirely unforgiving.